With us now on what goes into planning a park of this magnitude, in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Lee Potvin, Director and Assistant Professor at Lakehead University's School of Outdoor Recreation, Parks and Tourism. And here in our studio, Dave Barton, Mayor of the Township of Uxbridge, Tim Gray, Executive Director at Environmental Defence, Mike Hendren, Ontario Region Vice President at the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
It's very nice to be talking about parks. I'm a huge park geek. Every weekend, my family is out on a nature trail of some kind. And I guess we should say this is just a proposal. Nothing is set in stone. But Mayor Barton, you said I could call you Dave.
Oh, you please do.
Okay, yes. Because I don't want your constituents to watch me and be like, she's very rude by calling you Dave.
Yeah, and just, in Uxbridge, if you don't call me Dave, then
I'm an outsider?
You won't be fully accepted.
Okay,
yeah.
Maybe I'll just throw in your worship.
Oh, yeah, that's less socially acceptable, just so you're aware.
All right, I'll pose the first question to you because
perfect.
Obviously this is happening in Uxbridge and it must be very exciting for you all. It's been called the first ever provincial urban park. What makes it urban?
And we're just creating this right now. So this is the very first. So I think we're sort of flying this plane. We're piloting this plane as we fly it. So
it's exciting.
It's very exciting. We're very excited about how this is going to work. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why we're calling this urban is it's not one big parcel of land. There's not a park ranger with a Jeep and a hat. This is lands that are all around our municipality. They weave in and out of other conservation lands, other houses, other farms, other commercial properties, and they just happen to be protected like a provincial park.
Well, what makes it different? Because I think I've been in that area, because people can go there and walk there right now, right? Can't they, on the trails?
Not in this area. So the lands that we're talking about with this park have been closed. They've been fenced, no trespassing signs. Now, we have some people that know the secret way to get in, but my guess is you've probably never hiked on these lands. I know that up until last fall, I'd never been on any of these properties before. Okay. So the vast majority of people in Uxbridge, and certainly the vast majority of people in Ontario, have not ever set foot on these lands.
Well, we did invite Ontario Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, David Piccini, to the show. He was unable to come. But he sent us this statement. Our government is introducing a new classification of Ontario Park aimed at bringing these opportunities closer to home for people and families in and around Toronto. Uxbridge is the trail capital of Canada. It is situated just 45 minutes outside of Toronto and is centrally located near Toronto, Durham region, and York region, making it the perfect spot for Ontario's inaugural urban park. How accessible would you say it is for visitors without cars?
So bus goes right by. I'm sure we will create some stops so people can step off the GO bus right into the park, which is excellent. And then it's steps from my urban downtown, which again is we have Durham Region Transit go right into Uxbridge, and we also have GO. So lots of ways to get in. It's extremely accessible for my residents because almost every house is within a couple hundred meters of a trail in Uxbridge. So you can go from one trail system right into a provincial park. Okay.
And Mike, your organization, Nature Conservancy Canada, is one of the groups that would work with the government on this project. How would the process look like with this collaboration?
Yeah, well, that's part of what we've been doing for almost 60 years. We were formed really as an organization to help create new conservation areas and spaces in Canada. And we started here in Ontario and really recognizing that governments of all levels can't do this alone. We're a private sector solution really to public sector challenges, right? So our interest is to help where we can. There's a lot of great energy already on the table. Some of our major donors, I think of John McCutcheon, who's actually donated his property, was looking at maybe donating it to us. It made most sense in this case to donate it directly to the town of Uxbridge. And so we've been working to enable that. We're also, the lands that the provincial government has put on the table are significant. We may help with some of the assessments of what's there and management plans, bring some of our expertise that way. And we're also chatting with a number of private landowners in the area to see if there is some interest in selling properties or donating. We know there's a couple already, and that's voluntary, of course, but we're looking to help where we can. So we're excited about helping. We certainly applaud any move towards more conservation and more park space in Ontario. I think we all know after the pandemic, the biodiversity crisis, COP15, everything that's happening in the world, adding more protected land in this space. And certainly in Ontario, where the population continues to grow, this is a good thing.
This all sounds terrific because I think when we were during the pandemic, when we didn't have access to public spaces, I think a lot of people realized why they were so important. And this sounds like great news. The new urban park was announced on Earth Day. The government said it was a major step forward for conservation and biodiversity protection in Ontario. This is what the minister said. Tim, what do you make of the timing of this announcement?
I think it's great. I mean, I was saying to Mayor Dave, it's really nice to see a new protected area established in Uxbridge. And of course, in Southern Ontario, we have a biodiversity crisis here. You know, one of the richest areas in the whole country is Southern Ontario. And so anything that we can do to protect more area is obviously really important. But I think people need to remember that the tiny scale of this relative to what this government has been doing to attack biodiversity conservation in the province. If you just think even just the size of this particular area, it's about 500 hectares, might become a little larger. Less than 10% of the size of the area directly adjacent to the Rouge National Urban Park that they've removed protection from, and much, much smaller than the attacks on the Greenbelt overall. And of course, there's been broad-scale attack on planning protection for wetlands, natural heritage conservation authorities. So I really do think that the government is trying to put something a bit more positive to the public of Ontario around conservation and protection. And that's a good thing. We should take full advantage of that and get these areas established. But I think it's really important for people in Ontario to realize that overall, that this provincial government has been attacking biodiversity and conservation overall.
What concerns you the most?
God, it's hard to say. I mean, the economic consequences of this are huge. The attack on the planning rules means really an end to farm communities that are going to be able to provide us with our food in the long term. The attacks on the Greenbelt send a signal to the development community that you can buy up land, drive up the prices, make it harder for farmers to conserve it. Changing the rules around wetlands mean the loss of the very few remaining wetlands that we have in Southern Ontario. So it's devastating both from a biodiversity conservation perspective, a quality of life perspective, an economic competitiveness perspective, and a food supply perspective. So it's pretty devastating, the policy agenda of this government in terms of these issues. And I'm really, really glad to see that organizations like the Nature Conservancy or town of Uxbridge is actually able to get something positive from this government, and I congratulate them on that.
Well, Lee, Tim brought up some of the concerns around this, and you know, we are living at a time when we're trying to balance the scales for housing, protect the environment, because once it's gone, it's gone. We also need food in this province. Again, the pandemic highlighted the need for this province to be kind of self-sufficient. And I'm guessing when these decisions are made, there's a lot of planning that goes around it. There's 115 operating provincial parks in Ontario. Lee, what goes into the development of a provincial park?
I mean, I think we've been sort of hinting at what happens, right? And anything where we're talking about the government, you know, taking land, trying to protect it, you're going to have conversations with key stakeholders, community involvement, environmental assessment, conversations with Indigenous communities that are impacted by these decisions. But certainly, I think there is a political will element to this, of course. And I really appreciate the points that were just made about this current government holding this up as a great success of theirs related to the environment when they are doing so much to devastate the environment within Ontario, biodiversity and other places. So it is, you know, quite a bureaucratic process, of course. But for me, I'm always interested in the social implications. And I share the sentiment that this is a wonderful thing for the people of Uxbridge. I will acknowledge, as someone from the north, I've never been to Uxbridge. And so those contextual pieces have been important for me to hear about. Really thrilled whenever people can get to access parkland. Love that they will be accessible by public transportation, because that is such a huge barrier to accessing parks. But I also share the sentiment that this government we should not applaud on the whole this government. They have definitely a failing record when it comes to the environment.
I just wanted to follow up really quickly. You mentioned that what concerns you the most are social implications. What are those?
So for me, when I think about this, again, coming from a different context within the region, coming from Northern Ontario, on the shores of Lake Superior, the big piece that came out of this budget was the government's plan to rely on an extractive economy, and that is related to the Ring of Fire in the north. And many Northern Indigenous communities have said that they support the Ring of Fire development, and many others have said they absolutely do not. And this government is doing nothing new in terms of the decisions they're making in terms of economic drivers. It doesn't show me that they're thinking about the way our economy and then therefore our social life related to the economy should look like as we move through climate change. And so for me, I worry about food access. I worry about, I have children. I worry about their ability to live their lives without environmental disaster. What does the next pandemic look like? And how are we prepared to deal with that? And I'm not trying to sort of inflate that and be dramatic, I guess, but these are dramatic times, and the people that are holding the power right now, I don't trust. So love this, and I love it for the people of Uxbridge, and in the bigger, broader context of this government, I just feel concern.
Dave, I don't want to put you on the spot and be like, well, what do you think, Dave? But having heard what everybody has said and their viewpoints on it, this is going to benefit your town. Is this something that you prioritize in your campaign? Is this something, like, how do you see this benefiting the people in your area?
In many different ways. Certainly the access to additional green space is important for the township of Uxbridge, for my residents, but also for the residents of the GTA. We're just 45 minutes outside of the GTA, accessible by public transit. Again, I watched your show last night. It talked about how
On Ontario Place?
No, the one about trees, and about how when you're close to nature, you're healthier both mentally and physically, and it really changes how healthy you are. That's important. We need people to get outside in nature. We need to introduce all the new people that are coming to Canada who are settling here in Ontario. They need to really experience what it's like to be surrounded by nature. You talked about yourself and your family. Whenever you're out in a provincial park, it's a reset. It prepares you for your next day, prepares you for your kids for their education. So that's sort of where I'm at.
But when you hear some of the concerns, do you worry about that too? Or?
So from an environmental aspect, again, we are a farming community in Uxbridge. We are completely in the greenbelt. We're part of the Oak Ridges Moraine. We're protected by the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. Pretty much every provincial policy is limiting growth in the township of Uxbridge. So what we are concentrating on is sort of being the playground of the GTA. We are the best place to live, work, and play, but we're also a great place to visit, and that's what this park will make a huge difference for my community and for our economic development when it comes to tourism.
And Mike, the federal government has dedicated $3.5 million through Nature Conservancy Canada to protect habitat and biodiversity within Ontario. What have you been working with?
Yeah, well, no, I think it's a great question. Both federal and currently this provincial government has established the first private land conservation program that we've had in this province 2 years ago, the Greenlands Conservation Partnership, which is something we as Canada's largest land trust and all the other 34 land trusts in Ontario are able to access. And we actually, it was $20 million over 4 years, announced in late 2020, and an additional $14 million added in the budget just announced last month. So we've got all kinds of plans. I think we've shared some of them, certainly.
Is that enough? Because it's a lot of numbers.
There's a lot to do, but things have ramped up quickly. And yeah, it's definitely a huge boost. We're matching this money with private and with the federal. In fact, the feds have just renewed over 3 years, $90 million across Canada. So a decent chunk of that will land in proportionally in Ontario. So we're matching federal dollars, private, some municipal as well, and certainly private dollars on the table to deliver conservation. A couple examples, Batchewana Island, which is the largest island in Lake Superior, a little bit closer to Sault Ste. Marie than Thunder Bay, but we do have a number of projects and actually team members in Thunder Bay. Great community.
You kind of jumped ahead because I was going to bring that up.
I apologize.
Why are you buying all this land?
Well, I think, as we've discussed here, there is a biodiversity crisis. We know that many species are in peril. So as an organization and with our partners, we've identified, all across the country and certainly in Ontario, in the Carolinian zone of southern Ontario, 25% of biodiversity exists just in this part of Ontario. I mean, we're also the stewards of the northern half, or at least the Canadian side of all the Great Lakes too, right, in this province. So we have a huge opportunity with a lot of those coastal wetlands, and coastal areas are the host of many of these species. And so it's important that Ontario show leadership. And I think actually this is the opportunity we're seeing now with this increased funding. The program, I'll just say that you've mentioned Ontario's protected provincial parks, but we have a pretty significant and complex protected areas system in Ontario. We're the only place in the country with conservation authorities, which are kind of a quasi-government agency. We have the largest sector of land trusts, groups like the Bruce Trail Conservancy, Georgian Bay Land Trust, Kawartha Land Trust, who are all really strong public sector or private and third sector players. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot to do here, and I think there's a lot of momentum coming right now.
Well, Tim, you've been hearing what Mike has said. Do you think that the government, this province is doing enough to conserve land?
Oh, no, clearly not. They're going backwards on land that is privately owned and publicly owned. I think scale here is really important. So about 10% of Ontario is protected either as provincial parks, conservation reserves, private reserves like those held by NCC. We have a target that we committed to in the international arena to reach 30% protected by 2030.
In 7 years.
Yeah, right. And we added 0.1% last year across Canada. So we have a ways to go. We have to ramp everything up. And as Mike was saying, that requires investment both in private land conservation, but also in public. So we cannot afford to be going backwards on the policies that protect land outside of these smaller protected areas. So you think of Southern Ontario, if you change the rules to encourage cities to sprawl instead of building houses inside of them, if you reduce the protection for wetlands, forests, reduce the power of conservation authorities to do watershed level planning, then you can expect broad losses of biodiversity and the other impacts that are associated with that. More flooding, more risk, more farmland loss, less food availability, all of those horrible things that go with rolling back those rules. So that's kind of the situation that we're in, and we can't expect organizations like the Nature Conservancy focused on private land acquisition, as important as that is, to have the ability to conserve biodiversity across the entire landscape. It just won't work that way. We need everybody to work together. And the province, unfortunately, is really falling down there. And I think what's really important to remember about this too, is that everyone who has any experience and expertise in this issue has said repeatedly that this undermining of environmental protection has nothing to do with building housing that we can either access for the average person or be deeply affordable for those who can't afford market level housing. The province's own Housing Affordability Task Force said we didn't need to touch the Greenbelt. An association of the regional planners said the same thing. Kevin Eby, who used to be the head of planning in Waterloo Region, did his own report. There is no evidence to show that the existing land that we had available for building houses couldn't meet the target that the province has set. So then the question becomes, why is all of this happening? And I think it's very clear it's the ties between the sprawl development industry and this particular provincial government.
You mentioned Mike, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to just come to you, but I just wanted to follow up a little bit and just push back because we know we're in a housing crisis in this province. And sometimes I think it's the immediacy of people finding the importance of finding a place to live.
Exactly.
How do you balance that with, some people might say, oh, this land is available, we can build on it. But how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, there's not actually a balance there. I mean, I'll just give you an example of this, is that right now in Toronto, we're having a debate, it was actually at City Council yesterday, about whether or not we should be allowing houses to be built inside of the city of Toronto. Fourplexes, small apartment buildings, the kind they used to build on my street where I live in downtown Toronto, up until about the 1940s, and they've been banned ever since. We need greater density. We need to have people's homes built where they can access public transit, where they can walk, where they can bike. The idea of taking the finite labor resources and natural resources that we have to build large monster homes far from the city on places like the Greenbelt, when we do have a housing crisis, especially affordability crisis. Like, I don't know anyone who either doesn't have rich parents or is like in their 50s that can afford any house anywhere in this province anymore. So if we're going to fix that, we need to build houses in a manner, in a form that are accessible, that we can afford to build as a city, and we can afford to pay the taxes for as individuals, and we can afford the mortgages for. And that isn't building a monster home on the Greenbelt.
Lee, I'm going to come to you after Mike, because I'm really curious to see your viewpoint of, you know, you're outside of this GTHA kind of bubble. But Mike, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond.
Oh, well, I think just to say, you know, obviously as an organization in our sector, really, the land trusts across Ontario, we're very much optimistic and future forward about what we can do and hopeful for what we can do around conservation. We're working proactively with every level of government and every stripe of government, as we always have, to look at all opportunities. I agree that there are a number of contributions that the province can make in public conservation. And I think some initiatives that are underway that we're working on with this government and with other levels, we're hopeful around some larger public commitments to conservation. And let's not forget, 87% of Ontario is Crown land, is provincial land. So they have a huge opportunity to dedicate that. And there's a number of sites that have already been designated or identified 20, 25 years ago. So there's an opportunity there that we're working on to move some of that percentage point as well. And frankly, we're really ramping up our private land conservation in those really critical areas. We actually host habitat for approximately half of the species at risk in Southern Ontario, just on our sites alone. So, and we hope to increase that over the next few years rapidly.
And Lee, you're based in Thunder Bay. I know Ontario is not a monolith, right? It's a very diverse province. From your viewpoint, when we talk about housing and we talk about provincial parks, what are some issues faced by provincial parks, natural habitats, and wildlife in Northern Ontario?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I have two things thinking about housing now. Relative to the GTHA, housing in Thunder Bay seems quite affordable. So if you're coming from the larger market and trying to buy here, it's easier to do. Though people who live here are earning their incomes here, we have seen the skyrocketing of our housing prices as well. So that interregional difference, we've noticed folks that now have remote work are buying houses in Thunder Bay that actually work for companies in the GTHA. And so they can buy a house here, live here, but effectively work in Southern Ontario. I talked a little bit earlier about the Ring of Fire, which I'd love to return to, but I have a thing that's been bubbling in my mind related to the mayor's comments about access to the park in Uxbridge, and particularly related to newcomer Canadians. And I think it's really important that governments and decision makers look at the research that's out there related to the type of recreation that newcomer Canadians in urban centers want. I think the transportation piece is really important here, but there was a report released in the last couple of years called Race and Nature in the City. One of the authors of that is Jacqueline Scott, who is working out of OISE at U of T. And a lot of the assertions in that report are that newcomer Canadians identify nature in a different way than settler Canadians. So we identify nature and wilderness as something that is out there. It is a destination. It is dense forest. There's no one around. This sort of solitude that what seems like idyllic to particularly white settler Canadians, is actually unsettling, as identified by some of the youth that were part of this study, because of the remoteness, not because of a fear of wilderness necessarily, but because of a fear of other people and how they might be perceived as racialized people in that environment. And so actually parks of an urban nature that have access to this, again, the report identifies this. I'm thinking of a park like Christie Pitts, which is a municipal park in Toronto that has access to barbecues and other things where people can gather with their extended family. That is a priority for folks in urban environments. So again, I'm not saying that this park in Uxbridge has to check all those ticky boxes, but if governments are serious about wanting, newcomer Canadians and diverse groups of people to access parks, then we do need to look at the research, and there is research happening. That did not answer your question about the North. And so I'm happy to do that, but I really needed to get that point in.
You've got 1 minute. Go ahead, Lee.
Cool. Yeah. So, the challenge that we have in the North always is that we are different. And really, Thunder Bay is the middle of Ontario. We are not the North. We are geographically the center. And we are the South for many communities north of us. So those folks come here and access resources, whether it's, hospital, medical, social, work, economic. And our concerns here, my concern here lays in the ideology that underpins extracting resources from Northern Ontario to fund a government that wants to decimate the environment in Southern Ontario. And this is an old story in Ontario. It builds resentment in the North when we are seen as a place that resources can be taken from to support what is perceived the economic driver in Southern Ontario. And I think that this has not been done. The consultation involved here has been very challenging, but the government really held that economic development of resource extraction in the North up as, this is what is happening. And that's very concerning for me from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective. And it just continues to divide Ontario. We are different, but I don't think that we need to be, I don't think there needs to be so much division between us. And we are always perceived as having more land and more space, but that doesn't make it any less precious or important.
I saw a lot of nodding here. We have a few minutes left. Does anyone want to jump in really quickly before I read another portion of the minister?
Can't resist, because I love Northern Ontario, and I live in Peterborough, so it's not the North at all, but some people think it is, and that always makes me laugh. And similarly, I've friends and family and colleagues in Thunder Bay, so a shout out there. But we've identified certainly the whole shoreline of Lake Superior as very significant, and because it's really provides a lot of Southern Ontario biodiversity, but at a much bigger scale. And we acquired it in Hearst, which is basically due east from you, the largest private land conservation deal in Canadian history, twice the size of Toronto. So there are opportunities in the North to work with, and we see ourselves as an ally to Indigenous communities and governments as well. There's a great opportunity in the North we see to do things that you can't do in the South. And I agree that it is absolutely, there's misunderstandings about the difference, but both are very important in the context of Ontario. And I encourage anyone to do what I did, which was drag your family across Ontario for a summer vacation. It's a long way, but it's a wonderful place, and it's very rich and diverse.
It's so beautiful, this province. We do have another email response from the minister when we asked him about consulting with Indigenous communities for this park, as Lee mentioned, the importance of it. This is what the government said. The government has also reached out to all Williams Treaty First Nations, and the minister has had a number of positive conversations. Consultation will kick off soon through a posting on the Environmental Registry of Ontario, and we look forward to engaging Indigenous peoples, businesses, nonprofits, and the broader public further about what Ontario's first ever urban provincial park will look like. Lee, you mentioned the importance of consultation. What's the importance of Indigenous sovereignty when we talk about land conservation?
I think this is a really interesting question, because to me, it seems like we are trying to make up for the transgressions of the past, and so we should be. But there is something complex for me about the fact that this entire country is a colonial project that involved taking land away from Indigenous people, whether through, various treaties, and questionable foundation for some of those treaties. And then now we move to a place where the government is going to consult with the people whose land it actually belongs to in the first place. So, of course, consultation has become essential. The government recognizes that they can't do these things without consultation. And I just find it's a very strange, like if humans could live for 200 years and you could have been here 200 years ago and then here today, I think you might be having some kind of a laugh or tears related to the back and forth here about taking land and then saying, we're going to give it back and we want to consult with you. So I just find that to be something a bit strange where we're at. Although I welcome returning Indigenous lands to Indigenous people and see this as a solution or some step in the direction when we're talking about land back and more Indigenous sovereignty.
Well, Dave, it's weird calling you Dave, Mayor Barton. How does the province and local governments hope to involve Indigenous communities in the consultation process for this park in Uxbridge?
So I know, with conversations with the minister and ministry staff, this is extremely important to them. I know those talks have already begun. Mm-hmm. The municipal government is not part of those discussions. We're also someone who's speaking directly to the province. So.
Okay, and we've got about 30 seconds left, Tim. Looking towards moving forward, how do you hope to see changes in terms of protecting and nurturing Ontario's nature spaces?
Yeah, I really do think that there is opportunity on the publicly owned land to advance a more aggressive conservation agenda. The federal government has stepped up with a lot of resources. They're committed to consulting with Indigenous communities on creation of new protected areas. I hope the province steps up. I really would hope that the province rethinks its attack on biodiversity in Southern Ontario and focuses on building homes and cities and helping make them affordable for people, and that they stay out of the Greenbelt because probably 90% of the population in Ontario wants them to do so.
Thank you all for such an interesting and engaging conversation. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The agenda this week examined how the $10 a day childcare rollout is going and asked if Canada needed a new wealth tax. The agenda's week in review begins with a lively debate over Ontario Place, the Science Centre, and a privately owned and operated spa.
In a sentence or two, how would you characterize the plan as a whole? Ken, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to just talk about the steps very quickly, maybe 2 sentences, how we got here. We created something remarkable for Ontario Place back in 1970-71, a progressive conservative legacy project. We then got lost for decades when we kept calling what was a great waterfront park a business that had to be monetized. We ended up, the government, telling a big lie about the whole thing, that it was decrepit. The drumbeat on that started right after the election in 2018. All could be trashed. And all of that was to justify a truly horrible solution that nobody wanted or needed.
All right, Asma.
Yeah, Ontario Place is cherished, and it's been a cherished place for generations. I'm one of those that I count amongst the generations that cherish it. And it has actually demonstrated that it can be a welcoming, green, and publicly accessible space for all of us to enjoy. And what we're talking about is one of the most valuable pieces of waterfront real estate in North America. And we have this one precious chance to get it right for now, but also for our kids and for our grandkids. And to get it right, we have to ensure that we are engaging in good public policy on that vision for Ontario Place, that it's an open and transparent process in the decision making, so that we can have something that is beautiful and usable for the long haul. And instead, what we've gotten is a secretive process from this provincial government that is actually spending our precious public dollars to heavily subsidize a private spa and water park that has not proven that it belongs on our waterfront.
Anna, in a sentence or two.
I'm going to pick up on actually the spending of over $500 million to subsidize a private spa that most Torontonians won't be able to access a private company that I don't think anybody wants on our waterfront. I think that Torontonians' priorities is housing. It's affordable housing. That's why I talked about the Science Centre with the importance of maintaining the building as well. Let's not demolish our heritage. Let's make sure that that we keep that and we bring services. But above all, it's housing. And so it's very disturbing to see this amount of money and resources being spending on a private company on our waterfront, where our major priority needs to be housing.
So Anna, there has been a lot of ambiguity about your position. I've heard you say what you've just said. To be clear, you're against the spa?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
All right, good to get that on the record.
I am in favor of looking at the priorities that we have as a city. And right now, I would like to ensure that all hands on deck are building affordable housing in our city.
All right, so we'll work our way through the Ontario Science Centre and the spa and everything, but I want to make sure we get Martin in there. How would you characterize the plan in a sentence or two?
I felt forgotten there for a second. I would say that you can't go back in time, Jane, and all of us loved Ontario Place decades ago, and when I took my kids about a decade ago. But you can't just rebuild it because people weren't coming 10, 12, 20 years ago, and they won't come again if we give them more of the same or if we build a boardwalk by the water. So I have full disclosure as well. I wrote a couple of columns about this 4 years ago saying, let's move the Science Centre to Ontario Place. Right. So I'm not going to oppose that idea. I've also written a column saying that the spa didn't really make a lot of sense as an anchor tenant. But I think it's time for something new and something proven and something old, a Science Centre that is a success, and we can talk more about why that would work.
Well,
So
I want
Martin,
to talk.
Can I just challenge you on one thing? I read your column.
You sure can, but I got to keep track of who's the host. But go ahead, yes.
I thought we were
Go
having
ahead.
a conversation. Of course, we can't go back. We can't recreate precisely what was there in 1970. But during COVID, 1.5 million people per year have come to use Ontario Place as a park. The bones of a great waterfront park are there. I hope we can show some images of how people are using it. We keep getting the trash talk from the ministers, from the premier, saying they drive by on Lakeshore Boulevard. The whole place is a mess. It needs to be completely done over. And the idea that with a population that's growing to 13 million people in the Greater Golden Horseshoe and people who don't have cottages, who want to get to the water, that we don't need more park space.
What's the question?
So Ken, actually, I want to point, there's some photos there that this was taken from a group of Ontario Place being used right now.
Yeah.
Martin has written in the past, that described Ontario Place as forsaken and forgotten and long dead. Is it fair to see Ontario Place as basically dead space right now?
Of course not. And all the people who are using it for all the things you've seen in the photograph there, we've been taking thousands of photographs in Ontario Place for All to show people, get out of your cars, leave the parking lot, come down and see how people from the region are using this and see how overcrowded all of our public spaces along the waterfront, which is our great resource, are. And not everybody has $40 to go and attend the spa. Having public parks as free space, we don't, in other great cities in the world, we don't ask our parks to be businesses. We don't treat them as profit centers. We treat them for what they are, and they have enormous value. And so I think the idea that it has to be some kind of commercialized attraction is nonsense.
How successful, in your judgment, Armine, has the federal child care program been so far?
I think it's been an enormous success for 3 reasons. First, that it put childcare on the map as an economic development foundation for Ontario, for anybody that is trying to get all hands on deck again after the pandemic. Secondly, that it put a premium on attaching conditions to transferring federal dollars. It's kind of the old Roy Romano, we're trying to buy change. And thirdly, that it talked about the need to reduce parent fees, excellent retail politics, but following that up by saying, and more people need to have access to exactly that. And that's where it's stumbling. in Ontario and everywhere.
More on those three thoughts as we continue. Kim, how about for you?
Well, I'm going to say that obviously this has been an incredible experience for parents and completely needed. There are different aspects of the program. It was rolled out very, very quickly without a lot of consultation of the stakeholders because they had to get it out quickly and
Meaning
get it
you
rolling.
guys, meaning the operators.
Us and meaning the operators.
Okay.
We're seeing that change now, which is fantastic. And I think we're learning as we go. I think there's going to be a lot of learning to do, and that the Ministry of Education is committed to hearing what we have to say and how it is going to work, and be able to provide childcare to as many parents as need it and want it in this province.
Okay. Joy, from the point of view of employees, how's it looking so far?
Yeah, so far what we see is that we have more enrollment because the parents are coming out to the workplace to bring their children so that they can go to work.
So it's a good thing, I presume.
There's a
more
good
enrollment?
thing, yeah, more enrollment, and parents are getting more money in their pockets because the government is reimbursing them for the payments they made in the past.
So mostly positive as far as you're concerned?
Positive in terms of for the parents and for the children.
How about for you, for the people who work there?
For the people that work there, it's been like hectic for us because lower fields, it's not being matched with wages and salaries. So now we have a high turnover in terms of our supply staff. So because it's not helping the cost of living, so they're not staying. So sometimes people stay for 2 hours, 1 day, 1 week, and they leave. So we get burnt out because the government hasn't looked into wages and salaries.
Okay, we will pursue that. That's an important angle we'll want to pursue as well. Jameson, how about from your point of view?
A+ as an idea, B+ as execution. So I would agree with Armin. I don't think we've ever heard as much public discourse about childcare as we have in the last 12 months. That's a wonderful thing. I think we're all learning about the business of childcare as well as the impact of childcare. We all learned it during COVID, those of us who were home with kids. I think we learned the benefit and value of those people who provide care and education to our kids during the day. So now we're finding out about the execution going forward, and that's going to be the hard work that we're doing with both federal and provincial governments. So far, proud of the national infrastructure, but more execution to proceed with.
All right, let's find out what the issue is. A+ for idea, so obviously you love the idea. B+ is not bad, but obviously could be better. What needs to be better?
Yeah, and B+ with a trend line, right? I think it's been tough for operators. There's been a lot of back and forth on what the funding model is going to be, how quickly we are moving towards $10 a day. So in the last year, we had a 50% reduction of the fees. That's wonderful for families. That's wonderful for parents. That's wonderful for kids. As operators, the ins and outs of those checks coming in from parents and then money going back out to parents, that's an operational barrier that we're all having to go through. And then trying to get the clarity from the provincial government about what the funding formula is going to be going forward. That's where I'd give it a B+, and I would accord with Joy. You know, if you build it, the people will come. We also need the people to provide the care to the little people who are coming. And that's the major part of execution that we need to work on.
Armin, let me follow up with you on this issue of childcare as economic development. I know a lot of the rollout has transpired during an international pandemic, so it may be difficult to get a great understanding of sort of long range how this is all going to work out because the circumstances were not ideal in the beginning. But what do we know right now in terms of how effective it's been as a lever for economic development?
It is ineffective as a lever for economic development if you cannot get the staff to stay. There is money there to train them to do actually early childhood education. Don't forget, human beings from 0 to 5 are sponges. They learn how to learn in this window. They get ready for school and they get ready for life in what they learn in those years. And we want their parents to fully deploy whatever human capital they got in the labor market. And that isn't always providing unpaid care for their kids. That's minimizing their potential. And so where we kind of drop the ball on this whole story, make it cheaper for parents, increase enrollment, add spaces, is exactly what Joy was talking about. Do you know that in Ontario right now, the starting wage for a registered ECE who might have sunk between 2 and 4 years of their lives to study how to be an ECE and spent somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000 to do so, is paid $19 an hour as a starting wage, and that person could be making the same money working as a pet groomer based on Indeed's job boards. And in fact, I was looking at this up, in garbage workers in Ontario get paid $25 to $30 an hour plus benefits. So we pay more to the people that throw our garbage out than the people that are developing our next generation of human beings. It seems to me like a massive oversight in the way the program was developed and funded to begin with, where we talk about the need for better workers to be able to do basically the hat trick being get more parents to work, increase purchasing power because they're working more, so you're fueling all businesses, and then you're developing the skills of the next generation. That's the hat trick. We're doing number 1 and number 2 and not number 3. It's just a waste of money.
We always start with the fundamentals, right? You know, the tax system has to be fair in order for people to accept it and to cooperate with it. And so anytime there's a sense that things are not fair or they're getting less fair, I think people start saying, well, we need to fix it. And often people want to start by fixing it with something new, like a wealth tax, instead of fixing the system that we have. So, you know, I've said this before on the program, I think we often have to go back to the fundamentals and look at our income tax system the way that it works now and start thinking about what we could improve with the system we have before we start layering on top.
Tyler, what does that comment say to you about what constitutes wealth in this country?
Well, look, I think it is realistic for people to know that, wealth has actually improved quite a bit over the course of the last 15 years. People have actually gotten richer. And that's true in all groups for the most part, except the very poorest in our society. But the old adage, you're richer than you think, is actually true. And in fact, wealth inequality has actually improved even post-pandemic in the last 3 or 4 years, something that I think would be shocking to a lot of people. But I think this goes to a basic question of, do people feel like the economy is working for them? And a great example of that, so like Graham, I also teach at the University of Toronto, and students in my class, we were recently talking about tax issues, and when they talked about tax, they said to themselves, I don't feel like I'm going to get ahead, and I also don't feel like I'm going to get ahead because I don't know that I'm going to be able to buy a house. And so I don't know that that translates into we have to therefore change the tax system to address that problem, but we have to be able to show people that they are able to get ahead in society.
Okay, Birute, how do you react to what you just heard from Paul and the rest?
Well, I will tell you that I work with older clients who do estate planning work, and they are very dismayed at the already high level of taxation. And they feel that the wealth that they have accumulated throughout their lives is due to the very frugal lifestyle that they pursued that is not really comparable to the lifestyle of the current younger generations that may not be able to afford to buy a home, for example. And also have observed that when younger people inherit an estate, they are not necessarily very enthusiastic about saving that house of the family or buying a house with inherited assets. Rather, they would like to invest that money in something that brings enjoyment on a daily basis or perhaps luxury purchases.
So the frugality of the previous generation may not be echoed in this generation.
That is my observation.
That is, okay. Graham, how do you react?
So, to go a little further on Paul's point, there's a question of intergenerational fairness here. About an incredible amount of wealth generated by especially the housing market in Canada, and people really struggling to feel like they're able to build that kind of nest egg in a younger generation. Now, I'm sure many of Birute's clients are slightly older than the baby boomer generation, but I don't think we would call the baby boomer generation particularly frugal in historical terms. We do have a problem of how we're going to pay for all of the social services that we have come to take for granted and that we appreciate as a society. And how we're going to pay for those is really the major question in intergenerational fairness with taxation. Whether we're going to tax the incomes of workers in the future and increase those taxes, or whether we can find a way to have the oldest and wealthiest members of our society pay a greater share of the services they're consuming, which tend to increase as they age because the cost of healthcare as you age increases.
For sure. Alison, do you think, given I think one of the things that emerges from Paul's comment is that it is a little trickier to figure out who's wealthy in this country and who isn't. Having said that, do we need a wealth tax in this country in order to pay for all the things that everybody says they want?
Right. So, okay, everybody thinks everybody else is wealthy and they are themselves not wealthy. Right. And everybody always thinks I'm paying a very high amount of tax and I don't want to pay more tax. So we have to start from that proposition that I think people don't actually know where they stand. And I think it's correct to say it's hard to determine whether this person is more wealthy than that person unless you take as a principle of the tax system that we should be taxing on the basis of ability to pay. And that's embedded in the income tax.
Yeah, we do that already.
Yeah, we do that. And so we think about wealth tax. When you say wealth tax, I say, okay, I'm not opposed to a wealth tax, but what do you mean? Like, what are we going to tax? So when you say wealth tax, do you mean, would you like to tax the value of everyone's home every year? Well, the property taxes already do that, right? So are you adding on top of that? And is that means tested? Is there an ability to pay component to that? I think that you have to start asking those hard questions. And, you know, it's just much easier to say, oh, you just need a wealth tax and let's just get more out of, you know, some obscure, abstract pool of people that most definitely does not include me. I don't want to pay more tax.
So the devil is definitely in the details, and the details are tricky here.
They're always tricky, and they're always based on that fundamental question of when you start talking about what is fair, you have to interrogate that question. You can't just assume we know what is fair.
What's your reaction to a wealth tax?
Well, I recently read a study that looked at the history of the wealth tax in Europe. So currently, there are still 4 countries in Europe that levy the wealth tax. 3 of them on the global assets of a resident, which are in Norway, Spain, and Switzerland. And in Norway and Switzerland, these taxes have been levied since the 19th century. Now, in 1996, there were actually 12 countries that levied this tax. And they repealed this tax because it did not deliver the economic results and the tax objectives of the countries.
It didn't bring in the money they expected.
So it brings in a very small fraction of the budget of those countries, and it actually encourages to immigration, capital flight, very difficult assessment processes, because if you levied this tax in its purest form, you would have to value the value of the assets. They would have to be levied on the global estate of a person. So where assets are located in other countries, you would have to tax those assets as well. But how do you properly assess the value?
So,
do you require an annual valuation?
Too complicated then.
It's very complicated. It may be a good idea, but it definitely needs further assessment.
Tyler, how about you? You for a wealth tax?
No, at least not in the form that is described often by, say, Senator Warren, and not because it's not pointing at an important problem, which is that wealth has gone up significantly, particularly in the top income and wealth categories over time, notwithstanding what happened in the pandemic. But just because I just think it's a huge waste of time. It's going to take 5 years to build the administrative capacities to be able to measure and tax those things. And it's very easy to move money around. I mean, a lot of liquid asset is just cash, or it's even illiquid assets, which is very hard to measure. And so why would we spend all of this time and effort to try to go after a very particular form of inequality in our society when there are other simpler backdoor ways to go at the same issue, which could be either changing how we look at income or even just better enforcing the rules that we have. We actually lose a fair bit of tax just by simply having so many loopholes in our tax system.
We'll look through the back door a little later in our discussion here, but Graham, I mean, that is part of the problem here, right? A wealth tax sounds like a neat idea, a neat populist, easy to get money idea, but the devil in the details is so tricky and it would take a long time to figure out.
There's a big, huge chasm between rhetoric and reality, and the political rhetoric and the reality of imposing a wealth tax. I think we're all in agreement that a wealth tax is impractical, at least on this panel. Everyone who's looked at it, most tax policy experts who've looked at this will say, okay, well, most countries are abandoning their wealth taxes. We have fewer countries with wealth taxes now than we did 10 years ago and 10 years before that. The practical realities of implementing a wealth tax, measuring everyone's assets, and forcing, basically asking everyone what they own all of the time, and to have the government have that information is not something everyone's comfortable with. There are ways of doing this, though, that are much more practical and don't impose the kinds of undue burdens on people who may have, relatively high wealth, like a $2 million home, and a relatively modest income. And that is that when someone's estate is transferred, when they die, and their estate passes to a relative or to, someone else, they do have to assess and measure all of those assets. So we do give a value to the estate. And at that point, it can be taxed. Those are inheritance taxes. Canada stands out in the OECD as for not having an inheritance tax. Most countries have an inheritance tax. In most countries in the OECD, it brings in about 0.5% of total taxes. And in places like Japan and Korea, it brings in about 1.5% of overall taxes.
Do you like that as an idea?
It's certainly a better idea than a wealth tax. I think it's probably less painful to pay a tax when you're dead than when you're alive.
That's just some of what we covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, TVO.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, April 28th, 2023. Monday, what Canada is or is not doing to protect itself and newcomers from immigration fraud. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
The Agenda is always on. To catch up on conversations from this week or any week, visit our website, tvo.org/theagenda, or our YouTube page at youtube.com/theagenda. It's all there for whenever you want to watch.